Hello everyone, and welcome to the first potentially lost episode of OAM. Now this was originally supposed to be the episode where I compared Evangelion to Blue Gender, simply because in the first episode of this retrospective I said I would make a video about that, not really remembering that Evangelion is an extremely complicated series that I personally don't really feel that I'm equipped to cover on this channel. I do understand a lot of the nuances. I've read a lot of things about the series. Different characters represent different things, and it's a very psychological piece stemming in part from the creator's own mental experiences and struggles. So I respect Evangelion as an art piece. I really do think it is. However, I just bring that up because I want to say that I'm not fully equipped to talk about Evangelion. At least I don't think I am. I understand a lot of the lore, a lot of like kind of what's happening, but it's just such a famous piece that I don't really have any intention on making a video specifically about it on this channel, simply because it's not obscure at all. Again, that's nothing against it, it's just that most people know what Evangelion is, and I feel that I couldn't really bring anything new to the discussion if I were to make a video on it, so that will explain some of the hesitancy that you might hear in this video when I bring up like Evangelion topics. Also, in doing research for this video, I reread most of the Wikipedia pages about Evangelion, and I watched the final movie in the Rebuild series. I've seen the second one and half of the third one, as well as rewatching End of Evangelion and the final 3 episodes of the original series. That was the extent of my research. I have seen the entirety of the original series before, but I didn't rewatch all of it to make one video in the Blue Gender retrospective. I just bring this up because I may seem a little hesitant throughout this episode to talk about Evangelion, simply because I feel that I'm not qualified, and I'm not really going to bring anything new to the table. In fact, I think this video is a little redundant because Blue Gender is obviously not Evangelion. It's not even like a poor man's Evangelion. It's its own thing, like I've said before. But I did say I would make this video, so here we go. We're going to just get right into things and do a quick overview of the imagery, themes, and characters of both series, and briefly go over why the Blue Gender versions are not one-for-one copies of the Evangelion characters. Now, of course, Evangelion has inspired many things in many mediums, many different mediums. So I'm not saying that there can't be some, like, inspired by things, or certain design cues taken from Evangelion, at least subconsciously maybe. However, I don't think that whoever made Blue Gender was trying to make a one-for-one copy, or I don't think they were trying to rip off Evangelion, is basically the point of this video. Basically saying that, hey, Blue Gender can and does stand on its own. I also want to say that since Evangelion is a kind of mental exploration, a kind of exploration of human conditions and issues that arise from communication and interpersonal difficulties, if you or someone you know is struggling with these, it is important to seek help in a way that feels comfortable for you, in a safe way, of course. Again, I just want to put this little disclaimer in there because I've seen people struggle with mental health. I've had my own issues, and I just want to say that since Evangelion explores a lot of these things, it could be a little heavy sometimes, and I think it would be only appropriate to include this kind of message in any video which even briefly goes into its kind of themes and such. There are people ready to listen and help if you do need it, and I just, again, thought I should put that in the video. On the final note on Evangelion itself, people have asked me if I have ever considered doing like a video on the characters of that series. Again, it's such a popular franchise and it's been done by so many other people. I am a little intimidated by what I could bring to the table, honestly, talking about some of those characters. I have taken notes on the series, oddly enough, because it's just such a surreal experience. I feel like I had to. It wasn't for a video or anything, I just did. And those are lying around somewhere, but maybe one day I'll talk about, maybe do a one-off on the series or something. But until I really feel prepared, I don't really feel like addressing the series, simply because it's intimidating in all honesty, because of how well known it is and because of a lot of the complexity and depth there. Also, for copyright reasons, I don't think there's going to be any Evangelion footage in this video, so sorry about that. Anyways, let's go. Starting with the imagery of both series, Evangelion is renowned for its sort of mysterious and odd imagery. It uses a lot of religious imagery, even if it's not necessarily supposed to have any real meaning. A lot of it was chosen because it, quote, looked cool. That's an admittal of the production staff. I'm not just making that up. But it's a very mystical looking kind of sci-fi piece where the religious and the advanced kind of merge into a very unique aesthetic mishmash, which works very well for the series. And that juxtaposes very well with some of the other imagery of the series, which isn't designed to be extremely normal. Like, if you look at most of the cast, just in the park or something, they look like normal people. You're like, oh, it's a school trip or something. And then you zoom out and you see the giant mechanical monstrosity in the background, and then everything starts to click that, maybe not everything is okay. Maybe this might be something of a tough watch at times. You compare that to the visuals of Blue Gender, which is pretty different. Blue Gender is much more grounded, and it's much more open about the stakes at hand. Where the imagery of Evangelion is kind of designed to contradict itself, to further the unease and discomfort of the series by design. The imagery of Blue Gender is very grounded. This is a war. These are soldiers. They're going to dress the same because, they're in a military unit, and they're going to fight the blue, which are giant bugs. Comparing the blue and the angel, you can make the argument that they're both confusing, somewhat divine or divinely inspired forces of nature. However, lore-wise, their origins are completely different, and in terms of their behavior, they're also completely different. The angels seem to manifest some kind of sentience, or some kind of higher connection, if you will, while the blue are, for the most part, just mindless bugs. There are very big differences in both the imagery present and how it's kind of composed and presented against itself. Getting to the characters, we're just going to do a quick character-to-character comparison for the sake of disproving any, rip-off theories. Starting with the main character, you have Shinji of Evangelion and Yuji Kaido of Blue Gender. Now, there are some surface-level similarities. They're both very emotional. They're both driven by their own desires or insecurities, if you will. They show a great amount of fear at certain parts of the series, and they're both mech pilots. So on a surface level, they're a little similar. However, they greatly diverge past there. Shinji's story is one about overcoming miscommunication, overcoming the fear of communication, overcoming the fear of being hurt and hurting others. He's an extremely introverted young man who struggles with interacting with others, causing him to be lonely, which in turn causes him to hurt himself, and kind of neglect those around him and hurt them in a way. Evangelion is really a psychological piece about someone overcoming their adolescent fears to become more mature and communicative and functional adult version of themselves. That's really Shinji's arc. Yuji's arc is more all over the place and different. Again, like Shinji, he starts off as a scared young man, but then quickly becomes an ace pilot. Up until that point, I guess you could argue they have similar arcs, but where they go with that differs greatly. Yuji has setbacks, though, and even mental breakdowns, though eventually does come back. Yuji, on the other hand, is almost completely consumed by his newfound bloodlust, which they say is the B-cells, but is kind of a reflection on him as well. And unlike Shinji, who withdraws and kind of cuts himself off in response to adversity, Yuji kind of just goes all in, and he becomes extremely aggressive and almost kills his friends and even his lover. Another difference, of course, is their interpersonal interactions. Shinji is extremely cut off and cold, aloof, even though he does seem to be a genuinely nice person, while Yuji is very... He's not extroverted, I wouldn't go as far as to say that, but he definitely has no problems communicating with others, and he definitely seems to value their friendship or connection. He definitely seems to value life and humanity a lot more than Shinji. That's not a knock against Shinji. I know he's very polarizing, but it's just to say that they're two very different characters. Next character. For this one, we're going to start with Marlene of Blue Gender, second most important character of that series. And comparing her to an Evangelion character was kind of odd. Though if I had to choose one, I would probably compare her to, say, Rei. You could make the argument that it's Rei because these are two characters who are both aware that they're expendable and don't really put any value on themselves and struggle to communicate because of that. They struggle to really define themselves. However, where, depending on what arc of the series you watch, Rei kind of just, I don't want to say gives up, but accepts her fate. Basically, this is someone who hasn't really noticed their self-worth until the very last minute and then decides to utilize it at a critical time. Meanwhile, Marlene is almost always utilizing her own agency, especially past the halfway in the series, where she does form attachments to Yuji and does act upon this actively. She's a lot more proactive of a character compared to Rei, and they are very different for that reason. In addition, they're supposed to represent different things. Rei, depending on the interpretation, is kind of like a motherly figure for Shinji, where Marlene's relationship with Yuji is much more clear-cut. Boom, lover. Next pilot would be Alisha and Asuka. Now, this one is a lot more clear cut in my eyes. They're both kind of supposed to be the hot-headed, talkative pilot, or at least that's what I expected. Alisha was actually a lot more calm, which I was pleasantly surprised by. Asuka is known for being a bit of an abrasive character and a bit of a polarizing one because of her narcissistic tendencies. Now in Evangelion, it's a psychological piece, and her narcissism is explored as a means of compensating for her lack of connection with anyone. It's an unhealthy coping mechanism for her unbearable loneliness, and the series does do a good job leaning into that and exploring that. Other than the fact that Alisha has like the red hairband and Asuka is in the red suit, I don't really see any way of really comparing them. In fact, they're almost complete opposites. Again, Asuka's kind of a loose cannon. She's very proud of her being an alpha pilot, and she won't accept the idea that she's not the best. Alisha, on the other hand, is very open about the fact that she's bad at her job, which I appreciated at least. Very different characters. Again, you could also draw the connection that they're both kind of spurned by the main character who overlooks them, but in both series that's done differently. In Evangelion, it's because the two simply can't communicate. Even if there is mutual attraction there, they can't overcome their own communication issues. Where in Blue Gender, I mean, Yuji's already taken by this point, and he's not really interested. So different dynamics for different characters, of course. Next pilot, Tony. Who's Tony going to be compared to? Honestly, I would say Kaworu. And you're probably thinking, that's a horrible comparison, they're exact opposites. And to some extent, yes, you're right. In terms of like execution, they are. Kaworu is this beloved character who befriends Shinji and gets him to see some value in life and really helps him feel accepted for the first time in probably a very, very long time. He's a very warm and well-liked character. Tony, on the other hand, is just kind of a creepy, boring asshole who's in the background the whole time. However, I would compare the two because of what they're designed to do logistically. They're both supposed to be this character who befriends the main character, and then, unfortunately, due to circumstances out of everyone's control, they have to betray them, and they end up killed by the main character for the greater good. Now, in Kaworu's case, that worked really good because he's a very likable character who actually befriends Shinji, and then, for that reason, accepts his own death as a way of kind of helping Shinji out. Kaworu, of course, is an angel, and, there can't be two, so he takes one for the team, basically. Tony, on the other hand, he's supposed to be Yuji's friend, but that never actually gets executed properly on screen, so we never actually care or really even like him. At least most people don't, from what I could tell. And therefore, it falls on its face, it doesn't really work. Although he is still killed for the, quote, greater good, and Yuji does seem to feel bad about this, even though the viewers probably don't care at all. So, logistically, they are supposed to be very similar. It's just the execution and the characterization are complete opposites, but that's why I would compare those two. Then there's Miyagi, who could be compared to a wealth of Evangelion characters. You could argue that he's kind of a Gendo clone, you could argue he's kind of a Foyutsuki clone, you could argue that maybe there's some connection between him and Ritsuko, great scientists. Although if I had to really compare him to anyone, I would probably say it would be either mostly Gendo. I mean, they're both supposed to be like emotionless scientists working on some project kind of beyond comprehension. However, they're very different because although on the surface level they both seem to be emotionless, apathetic scientists, Miyagi is an emotionless man who still seems to value humanity and do the right thing for the greater good, even if he seems to be driven completely by logic, while Gendo is the exact opposite. He seems to be completely emotionless, but really his quest is almost entirely emotional, and really it's an extremely selfish quest that kind of only benefits him, even if he wants to say it benefits everyone. It's a him project. It's mostly entirely for him, and he is extremely emotional at his core and extremely insecure. So even though they seem similar on the surface level, at their core they're very different characters. For this reason, you could also compare like Miyagi to Foyutsuki, in that they both are actually quite friendly despite their rank. Although again, Foyutsuki is actually openly friendly, where Miyagi just still maintains a cold, emotionless exterior. He's not really a clone of either in my eyes, and they don't really seem to have anything that's similar other than obvious design cues. Miyagi has the glasses, he has the facial hair. I could see, like, design-wise, someone really liked the Gendo pose and said, we need a guy to do that. And finally, that leads us to the Council. For this character comparison, I would say, again, it's probably Gendo, simply because cold, seemingly apathetic body that wants to push through their own agenda. SEELE isn't really present enough in Evangelion for me to feel comfortable comparing them to the Council, although you could do that too. You know, it's a big bureaucratic body invested in its own obscure goal, as opposed to the actual society they're part of, so you could make that comparison too. But again, other than obvious design cues, I don't really feel there's any connection between, say, Victor or the Council and Gendo. Again, other than the Gendo pose. Finally, let's look at some of the themes of both series. Now, they do have similar themes in the importance of mental health and human connection, although at least for the latter, human connection, that's a common theme in a lot of pieces and a lot of anime, and I don't believe that talking about that or covering that idea makes something an Evangelion ripoff per se. It's a very common theme, the importance of those around you and appreciating them, basically, of making sure that they know they're appreciated and practicing healthy forms of interaction and building healthy relationships. A very general kind of topic, if you will. Comparing the mental health themes, this is where Evangelion sets itself the most apart from many other series, at least in my eyes, because around halfway in the series it becomes a sort of mental dissection of both the characters and Anno, the creator himself, who did admit that it kind of serves as a confessional piece for him as he kind of dissects his own flaws and neurotic tendencies through the characters of the series. It's one of the reasons why Evangelion feels so uncomfortable sometimes, because it's not just a character having a mental breakdown or struggling with their mental health, but the creator himself doing so through the screen. As someone who's had to help someone, through a mental breakdown before, it's the thing that I feel has come the closest to kind of recreating that without actually recreating it. Because it does feel like you're slowly watching someone break down. And when I say someone, I don't mean the character, I mean like the actual creator. When I've seen Evangelion, I can kind of feel Anno, I don't want to say suffering, but emoting through the screen itself, like it's kind of coming through it. Blue Gender, on the other hand, much more simple. It doesn't have any psychological deep dives like Evangelion does. It doesn't go into psychoanalytic principles like Evangelion does. There's no real Freud or anything in Blue Gender. There is no real discussion of any complexes or anything. It's just a more simple character arc. Yuji is scared, he emboldens himself, he gets a little carried away, he draws back, thanks to the support of his lover, and at the end of the day he becomes a more assured version of his original self. My point here is that having a character story in which a character matures is kind of one of the points of a character story, so doing that doesn't mean it's an Evangelion ripoff. And again, Blue Gender doesn't have all of the psychoanalysis that Evangelion has. It doesn't have all of the deep dives that it has. And while there are characters who have mental breaks here and there, it's done in a much more, I don't want to say cut and dry way, but in a way that's much more cinematic, I guess. Because again, at Evangelion, you slowly see these characters start to bend, and then eventually they break, and it feels more realistic because you can kind of see it coming, but just like in real life, it still hits pretty hard. In Blue Gender, it's more, oh, well, yeah, that very upsetting thing just happened. I can understand why you're upset at the moment. While Yuji does kind of have a downward spiral, it's not done as well as, say, Shinji's, and it's not the same pacing or scale of Shinji's. And finally, on the theme of communication, which is very big in Evangelion, not really present at all in Blue Gender. Again, in Evangelion, one of the biggest struggles present is the struggle of many of the cast communicating with each other, of overcoming their own personal and interpersonal awkwardnesses and difficulties. This theme isn't really present in Blue Gender. Everyone pretty much speaks their own mind most of the time, and communication is pretty blunt and straightforward. And considering that this is probably one of, at least, the central themes of Evangelion, at least in my eyes, Blue Gender not having that greatly distinguishes the two. That's not to say that it did Evangelion poorly, it's just to say that they're not the same show and they don't have the same themes. And that's really what I want to drive home, is that Blue Gender is not just an Evangelion ripoff, and it does deserve a watch. I understand that it might not be the perfect show for a lot of people, but you shouldn't write it off just because someone says it's a clone of Evangelion. I mean, obviously, you look at the Gendo post and you're like, okay, some of it might have been inspired design-wise, or maybe a few character tropes here and there, but it's not a note-for-note copy. It's not a blatant ripoff, and I just think it should be given a fair chance, because I know the criticism that it's an Evangelion clone isn't common, but it is one that I just thought that I would like to dispel, or at least explain why, in my opinion, it's not. I know this video is kind of redundant because for most people watching it, like, obviously, like, yeah, no, it's not an Evangelion clone. But I did want to say that even with a few similarities, it's not something that should be written off because of that. It's its own thing that should be appreciated and understood for simply being its own thing. And again, while Evangelion is a masterpiece in the eyes of many, and it has inspired many things, that doesn't mean that everything is a rip-off of it. And I do want to say one last time that I just am a little hesitant to talk about Evangelion because I feel it's a little out of my depth. I'm not quite there yet, if you understand. But anyways, thanks for watching this pretty redundant episode. Next episode should be the conclusion of this retrospective, so see you then.